So we finally have some more information on that Magic the Gathering and Final Fantasy crossover that was announced just a few months ago, including which Final Fantasy games will be represented in this crossover, as well as the return of a legendary artist that will be involved in this collaboration as well, which is pretty cool. So if any of that sounds cool to you, feel free to click the like button, and if you're new here and you'd like to stick around, you can subscribe, and as always, leave your thoughts in the comments down below. So if you watched my previous video when we covered the announcement of this crossover, you will know that I know next to nothing about Magic the Gathering. My trading card experience pretty much extends to Yu-Gi-Oh!, which I played back in middle school, and that's about it. So for this crossover, we're really going to be focusing more on the behind the scenes of how everything came together, what Final Fantasy games are going to be represented, but I will try my best to kind of figure out what these decks are and how they are implemented into the world of Magic the Gathering. So starting off first, we have the return of the legendary Yoshitaka Amano, who is the man responsible for not only so many different animes and iconic imagery in general, but he is so closely tied to Final Fantasy because he designed so much of the artwork, some of the earlier character designs, and just iconic scenarios that we would see play out in these respective games. He will officially be returning to participate in this collaboration. Now, as of right now, they don't have a ton of information on what he's going to be doing, but if I recall correctly, I do believe that they teased that he may be doing some new artwork for this crossover. And in the little teaser video they uploaded, he is holding a single card. So I don't know if it's a situation where he's going to be designing artwork for one card, or if he's going to maybe do like one card per deck. But either way, we're going to get some new artwork from Amano, which is always really nice to have because the man is an incredible illustrator and artist, and anytime he gets to work on something Final Fantasy related, it's pretty cool. Now, as for the cards themselves, there will be 4 new decks. These are commander decks, and from my understanding, commander decks in the Magic the Gathering world usually focus on one character, but for Final Fantasy, they're going to twist it on its head and have it represent one game. Each deck should have 100 cards, which is a mixture of reprints of pre-existing cards, as well as the new Final Fantasy cards with all of the cool new artwork. Now, which games are represented? They came down to 4 Final Fantasy games for this crossover, and those 4 games are Final Fantasy VI, 7, 10, and 14. And they came down to those 4 games in particular because it was a mixture of not only what games were most popular, I mean Final Fantasy VII is like the poster child of Final Fantasy, but they also wanted to make sure that they picked games that fit well with the Magic the Gathering playstyle. And they also did have people working on this collaboration that did have personal favorites, one of those favorites being Final Fantasy X, which is one of the games that got repped in there. Now, while these 4 games are the main focus, they do say that the other Final Fantasy games and their characters will have representation in some way in these decks, and we've seen some previews of that along the way, including the character of Lightning, who will be getting her own card as well, and I believe there was another character from 14 that will be getting representation too, so other characters in this universe will show up in this collaboration. Now, each game will have a representative. Final Fantasy VI will have Terra, 7 will have Cloud, 10 will have Tidus, and what's really interesting is that they almost picked Yuna, but they ended up going with Tidus, and 14 will have Y'shtola. And they came to those decisions based on not only these being the main protagonists, but in Y'shtola's case, she's a pretty popular character from 14, and I have no idea what's going on with 14. I just know that it is massively popular, and my only frame of reference for that character is from Dissidia NT, who I loved using in that game until they reworked her character for some reason, and I feel like they made her worse, so then I stopped using her. Now, what's really cool about all of this is that they seemingly did put a lot of thought into which games got picked and how they would be represented, because the themes of all of these games, or mechanics from some of these games, are represented in these decks, as well as their stories. So for the Final Fantasy VI deck, we have Terra, and this is going to be the Revival Trance deck, which is based off of the second half of the Final Fantasy VI story, which is the World of Ruin, where you're focusing on trying to rebuild the world and your party and come back from a pretty devastating loss. So her deck is focused on rebuilding and bringing back creatures from the graveyard. The 7 deck, which is represented by Cloud, will be the Limit Break deck, which will be focused on equipment and strategies. And then they do mention these different color schemes, which again, if you're someone who plays Magic the Gathering, you'll have to let me know in the comments down below what some of these colors mean. There's like white and blue and like green, but they did say that the green, which apparently is Green Matters, was kind of represented and connected to the theme of the live stream of FF7. 10, which is Tidus, is the Counter Blitz deck, which will focus on empowering your creatures, which is taken from Final Fantasy X's Sphere Grid, which is how you leveled up all your characters. And for 14, which is Yustola, it is the Scions and Spellcrafted deck, which focuses on non-creature spell casting. Now again, I'm not as familiar with 14, and they do admit that trying to find a theme for 14 was a little bit tricky, but this is what they ended up deciding on. But as far as the artwork that's going to be on the cards, they do want it to be as faithful as possible to the original games. And they are working pretty closely with Square Enix to make sure that that happens. So for example, Final Fantasy VI. Final Fantasy VI still only has like the illustrations from Amano and the original team at Square. We did have some stuff from the Pixel remasters, but most of these characters have only ever been depicted in that pixel format, except for a few characters like Terra and Locke, who were in Dissidia NT, and of course Kefka, who was also in Dissidia. A lot of these other characters are still kind of stuck in that 2D pixel art, so they worked really closely with not only the artists drawing these art pieces, but also the FF6 team at Square Enix to ensure that they were able to create versions of these characters that were modernized, but you looked at them and it still felt like something from OG FF6, whether it was the characters, the environments, or the scenarios that they're going to be involved in. And I feel like they've done a pretty good job of that so far. The 2 images we've seen from 6 are Kefka and Terra, and I look at those and I'm like, yeah, that's Final Fantasy VI right there, specifically with Kefka poisoning the well, and then this really beautiful image of Terra just kind of being Terra and looking really gorgeous and regal. Now they did have an interesting conundrum with Final Fantasy VII because we have the OG FF7 illustrations, but we also have the remake trilogy. So what do they pull from? So what they said was that they're going to have different choices. They're going to have some artwork that is representative of the original FF7 and the scenarios that happen in that game. There will be artwork that represents what happens in the remake trilogy, and then there will be pieces that combine the two, become fusions. So you might have remake Cloud, but he's depicted in a situation or scenario that played out differently like it did in the original FF7. So there's going to be some cool hybrid stuff going on with these 7 cards in particular. And just kind of glancing at the cards, Terra's is the Trance ability, which allows you to mill 2 cards at the beginning of your turn, whatever mill is. Again, those of you who are way more entrenched with Magic the Gathering will have to kind of explain some of this stuff in the comments, because I'm kind of at a loss for words for some of this stuff. Cloud is Haste, and again, it is more equipment focused. Tidus seems to be about moving things. He also has the Cheer ability, which is pulled from Final Fantasy X. And then of course you have Yustola, which is Vigilance. But again, just looking at this artwork that they've provided for us, I think it looks really nice so far. The Terra image is like this beautiful watercolor one, which kind of falls in line with what we saw with Kefka, which also looked like a really beautiful watercolor style painting. I feel like they very much captured the essence of Terra. Cloud is Cloud. It's kind of hard to make Cloud look dumb or goofy, but he looks super cool in this piece of artwork. But his image in particular looks like he's just gassed up his limit break and he's gonna hit you with Bravery. He's got a bunch of fire swirling around him and the Buster Sword. Looks like he might be in Midgar itself, or maybe is that Nibelheim. It's kind of hard to see some of the details behind that fire. Tidus's seems to be more anime inspired. He's up in the sky. Maybe he's going to hit somebody with some energy rain. But it does capture that energy that Tidus has, which is very youthful and energetic and athletic. Yustola, again, I don't know the story of 14. The Yustola that I know, she wore like white and like blue pants, had a twig as her, wand. She was so cool in Dissidia, where I don't know why they changed her. It was such a bummer. But she looks really sick. She looks like a dark mage here in this image. She's got all black with some white accents. She's got a cool looking staff. She looks sick. And this is pretty cool, and I think if this collaboration is successful, maybe in the future they can add more decks from other Final Fantasy games. Maybe we'll get some love for Final Fantasy VIII, Maybe that long-rumored Final Fantasy IX remake will actually get announced and come out at a later date, and maybe they could do a Final Fantasy IX Commander deck, which, kind of like 7, pulls from illustrations and scenarios from the original game, but also the updated remake. I might actually pick up some of these decks just because I think the cards look cool. I don't know how to play the games and I have no one to play with, but having these decks just as a Final Fantasy fan I think would be pretty sick. But with that being said, that is the video. I am Curious Corduroy. Let me know in the comments down below, what do you guys think of this collaboration so far with Final Fantasy and Magic the Gathering? Did I butcher anything in regards to Magic the Gathering? I tried my best to kind of learn on the fly and explain what I learned from the press briefing that they put out for this game. Let me know in the comments down below. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.